We don't have more time. There's this, those planes, they don't wait, as they say. And so, but I really thank you for the opportunity to try to do a little bit of this, because both Rabbi Avi Leibowitz, who's the Rosh Kolel in Palo Alto, and we were both very, very close to Rav Nota, and we have both are trying to figure out ways to formulate our thoughts at this during this time. And this is he had an opportunity. I think he spoke to the Smicha class at YU. This is a chance for me to try to distill a little bit. I tried on Friday night to speak about Rav Nota Greenblatt, Beracha, and I got through the Vort, but I didn't get through the expansion. So I cut it short, and I'm hoping that this will be possible. I got mostly through the Shiva this morning. Okay. A little bit of background. People don't know, because he lived in Memphis for 72 years, more or less. A lot of people don't. That's not true. He was in Memphis for 50 some years. He got there when he was 24, but because he spent most of his time in Memphis and spent his time ministering to folks in out-of-town places and not in the tri-state area, so Rav Nota's background is not so well known. His biography is not so well known. So I just want to start with that so that you get a little bit of an idea. Rav Nota was born. He was a ben Zekunim of a family of Brisk that had been in America already for several years. His father was a Rav and a Magid, and he was born in Washington, D.C. in 1925. He was in D.C. until he was 6, and then from 6 to 12, he went to Eretz Yisrael. His father was going to retire to Eretz Yisrael, and so he took Rav Nota with him. When he was in Eretz Yisrael, he saw big people. He didn't just learn like a little Yerushalmi kid. He also saw big people. And when asked who was the biggest person he ever saw in his life, he said Rav Kook was the biggest person he ever saw in his life. Rav Nota got sick when he was about 7 or 8 years old. We're not sure how serious it was, but his father took him to Rav Kook. Rav Kook gave him a Beracha for Arichas Yamim, which Rav Nota used to say was more valuable than anything you could get from a doctor. And he had unfailing health until he was well into his 90s. Why he came back at the age of 12 to America, I'm not quite sure why his father decided that, but I know that his father had one person in mind for him to learn with that was probably more important than anybody else, even in Eretz Yisrael, and that was Rav David Leibowitz. Rav David was already in America. He was in Torah V'das, and Rav David wanted to start his own thing. He wanted to start what became Chavetz Chaim in America. So Rav Nota learned by Rav David from the time he was 12, I think, until the time he was 16. And it would have gone longer, of course, but Rav David passed away, right, on a date which is very easy to remember. It was December 7th, 1941. It's usually famous for other reasons, right, because that was Pearl Harbor Day, but the Jews remember it as the day that Rav David passed away. When he passed away, Rav Nota looked around America about where he should continue, and he went to Boston because Rav Yosef Soloveitchik was there. Rav Yosef was joined in the early 40s by Rav Michael Feinstein, and he learned Rav Nota as a 16-year-old. He's described in the only haskama he has to his sefer. It comes from Rav Michael Feinstein, and it describes him as the youngest person in the chabura of that group that had gathered in Boston. There were about 5 or 10 of them. Rav Nota was 16 years old, and they learned there for a little while. Then the kibbutz it broke up, and Rav Michael came to be with his cousin in MTJ, because Rav Moshe had arrived in America, and they had made something. So Rav Nota came to New York. When he was in New York, he became very, very close Rav Moshe. He was in the house all the time. And today it came up several times that even though this was not said on Sunday, the truth is that Rav Moshe considered his two greatest products in all of the years at MTJ, Rav Nota Greenblatt and Rav Nisim Alpert. Those were the two. The two of them would say that the other one was the bigger of the two, but that is usually what is said in terms of the production of MTJ. The order of things was just like it was for David, which was that a bacher answered the phone if a call came in. For Rav Moshe, if the question was easy, the bacher handled the question. If the question was more difficult, so then it went to Rav Moshe. Rav Nota was that bacher for 3 years, and his relationship with his shimush with Rav Moshe was very, very close. At the end of that, it was, I believe, the call. I don't know exactly who called from Memphis, Tennessee. Rav Nota was. I'm getting ahead of myself. Sorry. Rav Nota was on the first. At the end of the war, Rav Nota was on the first boat going to Eretz Yisrael. He went back to learn at the age of 21. He stayed there until 23, 24. He came back to America, and Rav Moshe said, "It's time. You should go. There's this place called Memphis, Tennessee, and they need somebody. They want to make a little Talmud Torah, and you should go there." And that's how he got to Memphis. While he was in Eretz Yisrael, he had contact with everybody, absolutely everybody. This is a person who spoke with the Brisker Rav many times in learning. Not just, he didn't just see him. He had shaykhs to him. Rav Nota was, when he went to Eretz Yisrael, had a michtav, a hamlatza from Rav Moshe. This hamlatza says, at the age of 21, that he is omed to be me'amudei hahora shebedor. The letter was found only a couple years ago. Nobody ever knew this letter existed. They found it in a drawer in Memphis. Rav Nota kept it, but he never told anybody about it. But at the age of 21, that's what Rav Moshe said, and that opened up doors, as you can imagine. He got a chance to have contact with people all over Yerushalayim. When he came back, he went to Memphis. So why did he go to Memphis? So I believe that this is all of this comes from Rav David Leibowitz. I'm almost certain that today it was discussed a little bit at the Shiva, but I'm pretty sure it comes from Rav David, because if you're Talmud Chacham, what are you supposed to be about? You're supposed to be about Harbatzas the Torah. That is the yesod of everything. That is what you wake up to. That's what the day is about. Is that if you have Torah, you are supposed to share it. I'm not so sure that Rav Nota thought, and if you're of Rav Nota's stature, I'm not so sure anybody thinks of Flatbush as being that much different than Memphis. I don't want to make too much of an exaggeration, but there's something like that. Because if you're at a certain level, everything is bereft. Rav Nota was, as you can imagine, Rav Nota was read many shidduchim in Eretz Yisrael. But he told them, my place is America. He did not say, my place is Flatbush. He did not say, my place is even the tri-state area. He said, my place is America. Because if the whole point of going back to America was to be Marbit's Torah, it doesn't matter where it is. It doesn't matter. You're going. Also in New York in 1948, 1949 is not the New York that we have today. It's the whole country, the whole place is bereft. And so if you're going to spread it, I don't think it occurred to him as such a big thing that I'm going to Memphis instead of going to, I don't know, this corner of Flatbush or that corner of Flatbush. I don't think it occurred to him. When he got there, he went there to start the Talmud Torah. That meant really a day school. The day school they mentioned today, the day school did not charge tuition for the first 15 years. Not the first 15 months. For the first 15 years. No, nobody had to pay. There was no parnasa in this. There was no parnasa really in anything he was doing there. He was associated with the shul called Anshe Sfard in Memphis, but he didn't take much of a salary from that, if anything at all. The Greenblatt children this morning were saying that they were poor. They were poor for many, many years. They were very, very poor, because Rav Nota would not take any money for rabbanis. If he did a get, which he had learned to do getting with his father when his father was a rabbi in Newark. He took money for that. There was no money in bris milah, but he did brisin. There was, at that point, there was no money in kashrus either in America. That changes over time, but there was no money. But Rav Nota believed that a rabbi had to be absolutely independent, and therefore he would never think of taking a rabbanis in a normal shul situation. The Shulchan Aruch was the Machaber and the Ramah. They're the people who tell you what to do, and not Balabatim. And so he would never have dreamt of taking a rabbanis like that. In general, he disdained. He had nothing but disdain for the situation of rabbanim and what a prabba is in America for the job of being a rabbi. He used to describe a prabba as the chance for the women to look at the rabbi's teeth, right? Like a horse, like you evaluate a horse. He did not think that the way things were developing in terms of relationships between the Kehillas and the rabbi was a healthy situation. So he was not going to take any of those jobs for sure. When he left at Anshe Sfard after I don't know how many years, he had a private minyan in his house, and that was that. And there were enough people in Memphis who would keep that minyan going, and that's how he davened. He davened independently, and did not partake of the normal shul life in any way. Rav Nota took to Memphis expertise in everything in practical rabbanis. Not just expertise in terms of paskening, but expertise in terms of doing. He was not just a Masader Gittin, he was a sofer. He wrote his own Gittin. He was not. He could build a eruvin. He could do his own shchita, and he could be the Rabbi Makshir, obviously, of many things. But he was a shochet as well. There was nothing about practical rabbanis that was foreign to him. And what Rav Moshe Heinemann said on Sunday, he was the only non-Memphian who spoke, I think, on Sunday. That Rav Nota could be asked anywhere, anything, and his clarkite in terms of answering and his immediacy in terms of answering was a Palo. It was something to behold. When Rav Nota was asked a question, sometimes he said, "I want to look into it." It usually meant that he wanted to do research about the subject, not because he had to do research in the Shulchan Aruch, but he had to do research into finding out can we really not go into the prison? Do they really not let anybody into the prison? Do we have to do it like this? How much of a shasa dachak is this? He would, in order to get information, he might do research, but he didn't have to do research in terms of the halakim of the Shulchan Aruch. Those things were at his fingertips, and he had shimush. I think his confidence came, as well from the fact that he had shimush. He didn't just know the Shulchan Aruch in general. His tefisa in the Rambam was amazing. I felt that I was pretty sure that he basically knew all of Shas, probably all of Tosfos as well. That is Shas with Tosfos. I never, this didn't come up this morning. I've never tested it out with any of his, but in terms of the times that we had him give shiurim, if he had a little bit of extra time in Palo Alto, at the Kolel or whatnot, if somebody had a question from Tosfos, from almost anywhere, and they started to read the Tosfos out, Rav Nota could finish the Tosfos. So I'm pretty sure that that's what his hekif was. I don't know how much more beyond that. He would never have talked about such a thing, and if I had ever inquired about such a thing, he never would have given any kind of answer. The Rav Nota was involved in all kinds of major shilas that came up in America. He was among the people who dealt with 9/11 and dealing with the Akuna questions in 9/11. He was not the only person, as many people know. There were people in Lakewood. There's a Rav in Lakewood who Rabbi Yasher thought was the person that should deal with these things. But Rav Nota was brought in as well. He had a very clear tefisa and when circumstantial evidence could be used and when it cannot be used. He was once matter a woman after a doctor in upstate New York was caught shooting up drugs in the hospital, and a nurse took away the guy's badge, which I think is his permission to practice medicine. And there was a credit card record that he had bought gas in Buffalo, and they found his car near Niagara Falls. It had his talis, it has his tefillin, it has all of his identification in the car, right? But they had no body. Rav Nota said that he was ready to be matir, based on, he had a cheshbon in terms of circumstantial evidence, as it's Tosfos and Shavuos, which leans a little bit more towards circumstantial evidence, and then the Rambam likes to have edus. That's the way Rav Nota said it over to me. He did not want to sign the heter for the wife alone, so he asked one of the major rabbanim in America to sign with him. The person told him that he would himself have perfect comfort taking a shavua to say that the man was dead. However, he would not sign on the letter. Rav Nota, when he told me this story, he said, I don't know about rabbis today, he said, you need to have something. You can, there are different words for what that something is, but you need to have something to be a rav. And some people lack it. Right? Rav Nota had guts. He had guts. He was confident in what he knew. He was confident in what Chazal had to say about certain things, and he did not lack. He did not lack whatever it is that a person has to have to be a posek. He did not lack it. He was matir the woman. The family sat shiva, and I think they found the skeleton a year later. That's one example in terms of the practical rabbanis, in terms of the way he would be ready to paskin.
Are there a few more examples?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of.
Okay, if you have.
Yeah. So I was looking through my notes. Let me go on.
Okay.
Rav Nota's schedule was that he would leave the house on Sunday. He would tell his family that he's off to the airport or the train station, and then he would come back on Thursday night. That's not going to the Beis Midrash. That's going to the airport, or it's going to the train station. Sometimes the bus station. Sometimes he would take the car if he was just driving around the South. He is the person who opened up the South to the OU. He worked very, very closely with Rav Shlomo Rosenberg, Beracha, who was the person who built up the OU into something. It's closer to what you now see it as the place, the hechsher, which is bigger than all the other hechsherim combined. He was Rabbi Rosenberg's person in the South. He also was in charge of shchita for a while. He was in charge of meat, as they say, for the OU. But he told me that he gave it up because you have to sleep at night. You have to be able to sleep at night, and it's very, very difficult. Especially in those days, it was very, very difficult to have confidence that everything was being done exactly the way it's supposed to be done. But he opened up the South to much more than just meat. It was he was the OU's person in the South for a decade, probably 2 decades. He also had his own private hechsher. He had no symbol. Tabasco South in America was under Rav Nota for many years. I think it still is, but it has no symbol because until his son took over, he didn't market. He didn't have a mind for marketing. He didn't think about marketing. Hechsherim, we think of hechsherim as being permission to buy, but for the Kashrus organizations, remember that hechsherim is also it's branding. It's branding. It has to do with advertising. My dealings with Rav Nota begin and almost end with Gittin. I had a very dramatic get in my second year of Rabbanis in Palo Alto, but that's how I met Rav Nota. He called me up out of the blue, as he calls up rabbis all over the country, and he says that there's somebody in your city who I'm dealing with a get, and I need your help. That's how he introduced himself. And it happened to be an incredibly drawn out saga, which is mostly a story of mine, not so much a story of his, because he goes through these things all the time. For me, it was very dramatic, but for him, it was not quite par for the course. He would have admitted that it was dramatic as well. There was a lot of money involved. It had to be put in cash. It had to be transferred from one part of the country into another part of the country. It was dramatic. But one of the things that came out of that, which was one of the yesodos of what Rav Nota gives over in terms of Gittin, is that you do anything to get a get. Anything. And that you're not on the side of the husband, and you're not on the side of the wife, you are on the side of the get. And whatever it takes in terms of the husband or the wife, in order to make the get happen, you make it happen. Rav Nota would go anywhere to make a get happen. And if you were not ready to go anywhere, no matter how comfortable you were, in order to make a get happen, so you were not Roy to be involved in get. This was an absolute non-negotiable when it came to the way his approach to these things. One had to be ready to get up and go anywhere and do just about anything in order to get a get. This I saw umpteen times in the Bay Area. We would write a get in San Francisco, which for many years was the only place you could write a get, and then we would take it. We once took a get at midnight over the Golden Gate Bridge.
Why was it the only place you could write a get?
The only place that had Kehillas shame for a long time in the Bay Area. Palo Alto now has Kehillas shame. Rav Nota was Kehillas shame in Palo Alto. I should add that Rav Avram Teichman was Kehillas shame in San Jose, and it is accepted, I think.
What do you mean, the spelling?
Yeah. You can't just decide that I know what Oakland looks like in a get, or what San Leandro looks like in a get, or San Mateo, or any of the other cities. San Francisco's Kehillas shame has been done by Rabbanim in the early, and I think in the late 19th century, and our spelling of San Francisco ad hayom hazeh.
I hate to just do it. I just want to understand, like, Rav Aaron Kotler spelled New Jersey like New Jersey.
Yeah, almost no Rabbanim. I find this about Rav Hershel Schachter is the same, right? When you see the way they write in a ketubah, they have no idea how to spell. It's just the way it goes. Now, I could say that Rav Hershel would be the first person, I think, to admit this. It's not his thing. It's not his thing. But a ketubah is not a get. You can write anything in a ketubah because it's just a contract, and as long as the two sides agree that this is the way we're going to spell it, it doesn't matter. But in a get, it's as important as the names themselves. I mentioned in the car that the Maharal says in several places, I think, that the reason why we're so makpi on the place in a get is because place is one of those things which defined you, and therefore, just like we're makpi on the name of the person, we're makpi on their place, because place is part of your identity, just like your name is. So
San Francisco is the only place.
We spell San Francisco Samach Aleph Nun, first of all, which is not all of the sands on the West Coast are San Diego, right? San Jose are not all spelled like that, but as Rabbi Nota always put it, the Rabbanim HaKashishim had spelled it that way in San Francisco, so we continue. They also spell it San Francisco with a tzadi.
Cisco.
And so we still do. And once upon a time, I believe people did say that. They said Cisco.
They said it with its
With what we represent with a tzadi.
Interesting.
If I live in LA and I'm going to San Francisco for the get, it's not my identity, it's not who I am.
Yeah, I hear.
I'm just there for the weekend.
I
You
hear.
hear the part.
I hear. Enough. I understand. Right. The Maharal, of course, was saying this in a time when people were a little bit more kavua than they are in America. So it goes. We went across the Golden Gate Bridge. We went to the house of the woman. She came down basically in underwear. Right? Rav Nota did not bat an eye, right? I mean, I think we laughed about it as we were leaving, but these are things that happen. These are things that happen. He would just go forward. If this meant what he did not run out the door, right? She came down like that on purpose, by the way, because she didn't really want to get, right? And she thought if she came down like that, maybe people would run away. She was not in a bikini, right? Just to make sure that I'm not trying to take your minds anywhere, but she was not in a bikini, but she was basically in her underwear. But like I said, to make the get happen, it doesn't matter. There is something I want to say over from Rav Nota's sefer. The only thing he has one sefer. It's the sefer on the Chumash. It is almost all lumdis. I know for a fact that Rav Shalom Spitz, right, stark, he has a sefer regularly on his desk, and Rav Nota takes pride in that, because the Talmidei Chachamim get hana from his sefer is a big thing for him.
What's the name of the sefer?
It's called it's in my bag. Reach Hasada. I think it's called Reach Hasada or Siach Hasada. Reach Hasada. I think it's Reach Hasada. He expanded it. Took him many years, but it was a very thin sefer, which he gave me once upon a time. Al Manas La'ayin, not just as a matana, but he expanded it, and so now it's a little bit longer. Rabbi Leibowitz, the Rosh Kolel in Palo Alto, likes to say about the sefer that it has almost no, as he quotes his son as creating a word. Say overable Divrei Torah. There are not that many things that you could say, just at the table on Friday night. However, there are exceptions. In Parshas Emor, right, the parsha in which he was niftar, Rav Nota has a little piece, which I found arresting because of the way how appropriate it is. When they send out the Sira Lazazel, right? The pasuk says that you send it with an ish iti, right? The man of the moment, So Rav Nota says that it's appropriate that the seir, which is full of sin, be associated with a person who is described as iti, which he says means that he's a man of his age. He's a person who makes it a priority to fit his time, and to be in touch with his time and his place. And he contrasts that with the Kohen Gadol himself on Yom Kippur. And for the image of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, he uses the Gemara at the end of Menachos when Shimon HaTzadik goes describes what it is to go into the Kodesh Kedoshim on Yom Kippur, and says that he knew the year that he was going to die, because normally when he went into the Kodesh Kedoshim, he would be greeted by somebody who was dressed in white and whose head was wrapped in white, and the person would come in with him to the Kodesh Kedoshim, and he would come out afterwards. But the last year, the person who he saw was dressed in black, and only went in with him, but did not come out. That's what the Gemara says. Tosfos says on the spot in Menachos, Rav Nota doesn't bring this, but he said Almanat La'ayin, so it should say something. So Tosfos says on the spot, Pasuk says, Lo Yavo Ish. Nobody's supposed to be coming into the Kodesh Kedoshim except for the Kohen Gadol. And the Gemara and the Yerushalmi says, even a Malach. So who is this? Who is this? A Malach is not allowed in the Kodesh Kedoshim. So the Yerushalmi that Tosfos brings says that it's the Shekhinah. It has to be the Shekhinah. So Rosh Hashanah Tzaddik, he goes in, and he has an encounter with the Shekhinah. And that Rav Nota says is the opposite of the Ish Iti. If you are somebody who is not so meshubit to your time and to your place, so then you have a chance to have an encounter like that with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. And he ends the vort by saying, Yesh merchak gadol beinehem, between the two types of people. Rav Nota was beyond his place and his time. There's really no explanation for how a person could sustain the schedule that I talked about, right? That he left on Sunday and he came back on Thursday, and that whole time it's not like Rosh Shlomo Fisher, Zichron Beracha in Yerushalayim, who left home on Motzei Shabbos and came back on Erev Shabbos and was in his office in learning all week long. Rav Nota was in a train, he was in a bus, he was in a plane, he was dealing with people in Gittin, he was dealing with people in Kashrus, he was dealing with his hands full of down all week long. I asked him after one of the times he was in Palo Alto and he gave shir, how could you possibly give a shir like that after when you live the life that you live? When Rav Nota would come to Palo Alto, he would do 3, 4, sometimes more gittin in a day. When he would leave, I would need to recover for a few days. He would go to the airport and go on to the next place. How could he possibly hold cup under those circumstances in Torah? How could he say a deher of any kind? How could he say a svara? How can he say anything if you have a schedule like that? So it's funny. He didn't just say, he had an answer. He said, we say the same chelkenu b'sora sechel. He said the word chelik doesn't just mean a piece, a part. It doesn't mean that. Saying a chelik is idis, is something special. It's like your important part. So when you say the same chelkenu b'sora sechel, you mean may the most important piece be something in Torah. That's what we ask for whenever we talk about HaKadosh Baruch Hu taking care of our chelik. He told me. He said, my chelik is in Torah. And if your chelik is in Torah, it doesn't matter whatever you are doing. The Torah will still be there. The Torah will still be there. And that's, he said, why I still end up being able to say things. Because that is always the most important thing. Rav David, his son, said this morning, he once took his father to the airport at 7:30 in the morning in Islip for a flight at 6 p.m. that night. So Rav David said, because that's the only time he could get a ride. There was no Uber, there was no whatever. That's the way he was going to do it. Rav David said, what are you going to do? What are you going to do for 9-10 hours in the airport? He said, what do you mean by that? You don't think I have a sefer? If he had a sefer, if he had a chumash, that was enough. That was enough. Because there's going to be, in traveling, there's dead time too. We all know that. We all think of it as dead time in which you can't learn, right? It's impossible to learn. For him, dead time was always learning time. Always learning time. They said this morning that when he laned, and he often laned, when he laned, he paused. It was beyond the patience of many people who were there, he often paused because he would think of something on the pasuk. So he paused. Right? You know, like I said, it was a small minyan. Right? It was his minyan. Everybody was willing to be there. So if you had to deal with his delays as well. But if something occurred to him in the middle of laning, he would pause for a second. Sometimes he'd pause for a few seconds, and then he would go on. That's a person who maintained his chelik, I think, as being a chelik in Torah, and that's how over all of these years, I think he was able to maintain the level that he did in terms of psak, in terms of learning, in terms of Torah in general, and how he stayed absolutely dedicated to the principles that his rebbeim had given him when he was young. They said during the last few months, he would wake up in the morning, he would say, let's go to the yeshiva today, because he wanted to go to MTJ. He wanted to go to MTJ, not because there's anything there. I think he wanted to go there because he wanted to commune with the ghosts, because that's the only thing that's there now. Right? But those are his ghosts. Those are the people he relates to. So they never got there. He wasn't strong enough over the last few months. He would start the day with the idea, but they never got there. But they said at the Levaya, he's back in his place, the place that, in some ways, he never really left. That's what I wanted to share.
Shkoyach. Excellent.
Hey.